Bien, bonjour à toutes et à tous. On va commencer tout de suite.
Greetings, ladies and
Comme ça, on va
gentlemen. We
éviter
shall
de trop
start our
prolonger pour
session
ceux qui
without
ont des
further ado
engagements après.
to avoid
Merci à toutes et tous
delaying this session
de
for those who
rejoindre
have
cet
other
après-midi
commitments. Thank you
pour
for
la
joining us
seconde
this
session
afternoon
des
for
ateliers en
the
numérique de la
second
compétence
session
européenne de la
of
participation.
um,
On est donc sur un atelier traduit du français vers l'anglais et de l'anglais
we
vers le
this
français.
this
On
workshop was
a
proposed by the
nos
partners of the
interprètes
Master Lab
Myriam et
project. We
Rita qui
have
sont avec nous
our
aujourd'hui,
two
qui nous
interpreters,
font le
Miriam and
plaisir
Rita, that are here
et
with us,
l'honneur
that are
de faire ce
giving us the
travail
pleasure and
et on devra
honor
essayer
of
de
supporting us and
faciliter au
helping us
maximum en
communicate. So
coupant
we'll
les micros
try
pour avoir
to
le moins d'interférences
ensure that
possible.
everyone's
Lorsque vous souhaitez
microphones
prendre
are
la
muted.
parole, si
And
vous
if you'd
pouvez
like
lever
to
la
take the
main,
floor, kindly
au
raise
possible
your
également si
hands.
vous avez un casque
If you
clair
have
avec un
a
micro,
headset
ça
with a microphone,
facilitera la
this will
qualité audio
also
et
ensure that
ça
all
permettra
participants and the
d'avoir
interpreters can hear you more
la,
clearly.
la meilleure qualité possible. Voilà, donc on est très content aujourd'hui de vous
So we are
retrouver
delighted to
après 3 jours à
meet you
Strasbourg
all today
pour
after
les
three
rencontres.
packed
On se
days in
retrouve maintenant
Strasbourg for the
en
meetings,
numérique.
and now
On garde
we are
l'espace en
meeting in a
atelier à
digital
Strasbourg. On a
format
l'occasion de
after.
vous en présenter
And
12
so we
en
have
numérique,
the
dont
opportunity
4
of
traduits et
introducing
en anglais. On est
12
très content de pouvoir
workshops
continuer à ces
digitally,
moments de
including
rencontre,
four that
de,
will
ce
be interpreted
de
into
rencontre, mais aussi
English. And
d'apprentissage.
so
Hein, c'est
we are
vraiment le but
delighted
des
to be able to
rencontres,
extend this
de
opportunity to
continuer à
gain
se prolonger en
insights and
numérique.
deepen our understanding.
Aujourd'hui, on va avoir la
And
chance
today we'll
d'avoir
have the great
Caroline
chance to have with
de
us
Grenoble
Caroline from Grenoble
Claudio
Métropole,
Dandy
Claudio
et
Dandy,
Tamara de la ville de
and
Mechelen
Tamara from
qui vont
the
nous
city of
présenter
Mechelen
donc
that will all be
l'expérience
sharing the
du
experience
Must Lab Project, qui est un
of the
projet européen.
Lab
Je
project.
vais
This
tout
is
de
a
suite leur
European
laisser la main
project.
parce
And
que
so
c'est pas
without
moi que
further ado, I will
vous
hand it
allez
over
entendre
to
parler
them
aujourd'hui, je
because I'm
pense.
sure that they are the ones that you
Et
are
donc,
keen
je vais
on
laisser
listening
la
to
parole tout
today.
de suite
And
à
so I
Tamara. Je vous
will
souhaite à
hand it
tous
over
et à
to
toutes un
Tamara,
très bon
and I wish
atelier.
you all an excellent
Et
workshop.
si vous avez la moindre question, vous pouvez la mettre dans le
And
chat
if you
et
have
j'y
any
répondrai
questions,
sans
please feel
souci.
free
Merci à vous.
to enter your question in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Gabriel, for inviting us to this gathering, European gathering of participation. We are really happy to be with you here today and to be able to present the Master Lab project. I will share the presentation with you. Voila. Master Lab, a journey into participatory democracy. And what a journey it was. I will tell you first a bit more about the project itself. It's a project that started in January 2022, so right after Corona, and it ended some months ago in December 2024. We have 6 local administrations that were made part of this project: Fuenlabrada from Spain, Livadia, Greece, Mechelen, Belgium, Modena, Italy, Vienna from Austria, and Grenoble-Alpes Métropole. Apart from that, we had 4 knowledge partners, 2 universities, Unimore and Karel de Grote School in Belgium, the International Institute for Humanitarian Law, and an European education organization called FREREF. You can find more practical information about the project on the website. But what I want to talk to you about is what the challenges were that the 6 local administrations dealt with, and how participation helped them partially solve those challenges. The idea of Master Lab was that each local administration would choose a specific policy challenge that they found important. It had to be a complex challenge that required multiple stakeholders to be solved. So in Fuenlabrada, they dealt with participation of youth, how we can get more young people to be active in our policymaking process. In Grenoble, it was the matter of reception policy. My colleague Caroline will tell you more about it. In Mechelen, we dealt with a sense of belonging in schools. It was the problem that we dealt there was how to make sure that children and young people with migration background feel more welcome at schools. In Modena, it was about the integration of young adult migrants, and they dealt with issues such as employment, volunteering, and sport. And in Livadia, they focused on the integration of refugees, and specifically on health, employment, and education. Whereas Vienna dealt with participation on the topic of human rights, education, and employment. So the common theme was how to get more migrant citizens involved in the policy-making process, but each city chose a specific challenge. How we dealt with it within the project is that in 2022, when the project started, we had a phase of capacity building. Then in 2023, we engaged in policy labs. So each city performed a cycle of policy lab, which includes 3 policy lab workshops, micro experiments, and then policy recommendations. And then in 2024, it was a follow-up phase where we implemented the recommendation, where we embedded the methodology within the municipalities, and where we worked further on transnational cooperation. I will get into each of the 3 stages now. Capacity building, we had it was the first year of our project. It involved first doing a mapping of inclusion and participation practices for the 6 local administrations that took part in the project. We wanted to see how what kind of integration practices are they do they have, and how to which point are migrant citizens already engaged in policy-making practices, what kind of good practices they can bring to the table. Then we did, for each of the challenges that the local administrations presented, we did a stakeholder mapping. So which people do we need to have in our participation process, so we make sure that we consider the challenges from all possible perspectives. And further, and last but definitely not least, we had a facilitators training. The policy lab workshops needed to be facilitated by at least 2 people. And since the quality of the workshops rests for a big part on the facilitation, it was really important to have well-trained people to do that. Further on, the policy labs took place. I'm showing you here pictures from Mechelen, from Grenoble, and from Fuenlabrada. So what happened? This is what happened in 2023. Each city had a full cycle of policy lab workshops. First, the preparatory workshops for the participants, and then 3 workshops within the year. When I say workshops, you need to imagine that those workshops lasted from 1 to 2 days each, so it was pretty time intensive. The first 2 workshops took part in January and March. Then we had time to perform the micro experiments, and then the last workshop took part in November. When I say micro experiments, this means that we had some time between April and November to see what kind of actions could be performed in order to address the policy challenge in question that were innovative for the cities in question. So aside from discussing the policy challenge from different aspects, there was a very practical aspect to the policy labs. And there is, as a result of the policy lab cycle, each city ended up with recommendations. What can various stakeholders do, the city's administration, but also the NGO sector, the private sector, the citizens themselves, what can they do in order to address the policy challenge? And in the last year, so that was last year, we did the follow-up. We were very happy to have this specific part as part of the project as integral part of our project, in order to avoid that the recommendations would be the end of the story. So we had, as an integral part of our project, we had this follow-up, which included the implementation of the recommendations. We call this the process of institutionalization. So the recommendations that were made in the policy lab groups were meant to be translated into actionable plans, into actionable action plans for the local administrations. So to give you an example, I take the example from Mechelen, not because it is the best one, but because I know it best. As I told you, the topic of our policy challenge was the sense of belonging at school. So what can the different stakeholders do? What can the schools do, the parents, the local administration, the policymakers, what can they do in order to ensure that children and youth with migration background feel at home at school? So in our first policy lab, we had very vivid discussions about what are the key elements of a school where everybody feels at home. What are the key elements of a warm school? And one of those elements was authenticity. So together with the whole group, in the group we had parents, we had teachers, we had the children as well. We had two girls from over 11-year-old girls. We had psychologists, we had youth workers, we had politicians. So one of the key elements that they agreed upon is that authenticity is very important. So everybody can be who they really are at school. Going from there, we went to a micro experiment. The question was, what can we do in schools to ensure that everybody can be their authentic self? And then in one school decided to perform a micro experiment that consisted of activities for connection. What kind of connecting activities we can do? So there is, in order to raise trust between teachers and students and among the students themselves. Based on the results of that experiment, that was the results were positive, they developed a recommendation. The recommendation was, during the experiment, we made use of so many tools that already exist to do this. So the tools are there, but we think people don't use them enough. So the recommendation was, let's promote those tools, those methodologies that already exist to create this trust in schools and to promote authenticity. And this got translated into a specific action, and that was that in Mechelen we organized a multidisciplinary conference on education and on participation of youth, so that experts from different fields could exchange experiences. This is just one of the examples. So based on the micro experiments, some other recommendations were formed, and we had 3 other key elements. But you have to imagine that this is also only Mechelen. In 5 other cities, they had the same process in the last year. So in the end, with MasterLab, we went from a very quite abstract discussion of policy challenges through micro experience, and then we ended up with specific and very concrete actions. The lessons that we learned in this process is there are many lessons, but I would like to point out these 3. First is that policymakers should be engaged from day one. It's a 3-year project, and the policymakers are needed in every step of the way. But where we felt their absence or maybe lack of engagement the most was in the 3rd year, when we had to do the follow-up and to implement those actions. And if we had to do it again, we would definitely invest more energy into engaging them from the very beginning. Second, I mentioned this already, good facilitation is the key to creating shared stories. So you have to imagine in a policy lab, you have so many different stakeholders. I gave you the example of Mechelen with the children and parents and policymakers. They all come to the policy labs with their own perspective. They tell their own stories, but it takes a very good facilitator to create a common story from all those shared stories. And that's where the key is. And the value lies also in the process. When talking about the policy labs, I told you that we did the micro experiments, that we played with some innovative experiments, but innovation is really, although important, it doesn't have necessarily to be the only important thing. So I noticed while doing the policy labs in Mechelen that a lot of people get really connected and engaged with the diversity school. So it's a less concrete result, but it's very, very valuable. And I would like to invite you to take a look at after the workshop or at a later moment to take a look at our guidelines for organizing policy labs. They are available in different languages, amongst others in French, where you can see all the lessons learned that we have learned from MasterLab. And you can see for yourself whether the policy lab as methodology is something that would work for you. Another thing that I can recommend is the web documentary. I put the link in the presentations where you can see how our project was developed and how it progressed from day one to the very last day. And I would now like to give the word to Claudio Dondi. He's from the International Institute of Humanitarian Law. He is our expert in policy labs, and he is the one that guided the Policy Lab Consortium through the 3 years that we did Master Lab. Thank you. To you, Claudio.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for being with us, and thanks to Décider, ensemble, not only for inviting us to this opportunity. I had the opportunity to be 2 days in Strasbourg, and I enjoyed a lot the full immersion into participatory democracy. And of course, I also learned a lot of new things that I didn't know. But today I'm going to explain to you the essence of the approach we used, as we called it policy labs. Of course, there are several ways to organize policy labs. Policy labs are, of course, part of participatory democracy, but they are aimed to bring citizens within the policy-making process, or to hear. They are complementing representative democracy with an approach that is, by definition, inclusive and bottom-up. But they are different from other forms of participation that I was hearing in the last 2 days in Strasbourg, in the sense that, first of all, they are small-scale activity in which 20 to 30 people are grouped, and they tend to be the same for about 1 year. Secondly, they are not called by random, but on the basis of their interest in the subject that is dealt with, that we call pompously the policy challenge. And third, they are based on a participation of citizens in the full cycle of definition of where is the problem, if there is a problem, or where is the opportunity for improvement, and then so diagnosis, proposal, refinement of the proposal, articulation of micro-experiments, evaluation, and on the basis of the evaluation, recommendation and implementation of the recommendation themselves, as Tamara has explained. Two special points of the project that must be mentioned is that, first of all, we had this third year that is not common in most projects that are funded by the European Union. That means we had 1 year just to implement the recommendations that were proposed. In most projects, you finish the project with recommendation that you present in a conference, and then you don't know what happens afterwards. In our project, we explicitly designed the third year as a follow-up year to guarantee that some reflection was made, some recommendations were implemented, and some international networking activities was happening as part of the third year. The second important element of this project is that it produced research. We had 2 universities involved in the evaluation, and they, of course, produced a quite substantial evaluation report on the dynamics that were happening during the workshops. So in order to analyze well how effective we were in extracting opinions and how effective we were in then driving the group towards some concrete recommendations, because the balance was between the, let's say, the diverging phase in which we tried to get as many opinions as possible from the participants, and the converging phase in which we wanted to propose something concrete that the local administration could use. Now, of course, I think it's already clear that policy labs are different from a policy roundtable between politicians and experts. No expertise is required to take part in a policy lab, but simply an experience, an interest in the subject. So being involved in the subject. They're very different from an online consultation because they build massively on personal interaction and also on confidentiality. They are applying Chatham House rule in order that every participant can leave the hat out of the room and talk freely as an individual, exchanging idea with other individuals. No respect with the fact that the policymaker is there, the migrant is there, the representative of the house owners association is there. And these are the three basic principles that we used. First of all, we let the final user talk first, because we believe that their experience of the public policy should be the starting point to identify improvements, and they also have the possibility to rename the policy challenge according to what they feel is the real problem. And this is very important, because through this, policymakers can understand things that were not reaching them by the normal constituted stakeholders groups that are around the city administration. Design thinking, I think it's common to many participatory approach. And of course, it goes beyond an incremental improvement. It tries to make people think what is possible, not only what is immediately doable. And the system approach, never we had only one public administration, but we always tried to have more administration or more department of the administration present, based on the principle that the problem belongs to the final beneficiaries of the public policy, and these may have difficulty in dealing with more than one office of the public administration at the time. So we tried to follow the logics of the user. And so we invited different departments of the same city, some state, some regional, some city authorities together. So these are the three principles. Then next slide, Mara, please, is this graph. You will certainly, most of you have already worked with the design thinking, and this just illustrates the two sequences of diverging, converging, diverging, converging that were distributed along a long period in 2023. The first part is when we extract points of view from the participants, that are 1/3 migrants in our case, 1/3 people involved in the public administration, and 1/3 middle stakeholders, that some of which were official representative of some groups, some others were more people that had to do with migrants in their normal activity, and so they had some witness to give on where the problem were and where the improvement opportunities were. And then, of course, you have a pause in the middle, a pause in which the different proposals elaborated in the long list of proposals elaborated in the define phase were selected, were checked with the surrounding stakeholders community. And then we had the second meeting where people were choosing finally the proposals, the best proposal on the basis of their potential impact and their feasibility, and then they were organizing, designing the micro-experiment as a field test of the idea on a very small scale in order to check whether some improvements were actually produced or it was just wishful thinking by the participants in the policy lab. Based on that, deliver means formulating the recommendation based on evidence. The next slide, please. Okay, so the important thing Tamara already mentioned, the only impact of the policy lab is not that there is a change in the policy. There is a learning impact, and there is a consolidation of the participatory practice at the local level. So it's important that we keep all the three in mind when we evaluate what was the result. In our case, in this project, the big results was also that the recommendations were actually implemented. But we shouldn't underestimate the learning process. Citizens were learning more about the way policies are shaped, about the existing policies, about the people who were on the decision-making board. And of course, there was a consolidation of the participatory practice at the city level that in most of cases brought an institutionalization of participation. And that was also a result for which we are particularly proud. Now, which one of the three is more important in your context is your decision. But it's important to have in mind that three main objectives can be attributed to policy labs. Now, this is a little bit mechanistic, and we don't have much time to go through each one of them. I would just stress some of them. First of all, you need to have a clear policy challenge that is meaningful for many people to start a policy lab. You need to co-own the importance of this challenge. So if you are not a public administration, you need to find a public administration who wants to open a discussion on this. If you are a public administration, you need to be sure that some stakeholders are following you in judging this issue important. And then, of course, it's not pure amateurism. Data and expertise are welcome in a policy lab, but they shouldn't be allowed to dominate the full debate, because the importance of the policy lab is to activate the expression of people who may not be technically competent, but they may bring new ideas on the issue. And then, of course, the other time is important. It's difficult to organize a policy lab in one day. You need a certain time in order to let the reflection consolidate, to let the people who are not taking part in the workshop to listen from those who are taking part, what are the hypotheses that are emerging, to express themselves, what is better, what is not so interesting. Then we can go to the next. Yeah, of course, there is not one single form of policy lab. In Master Lab, we used a relatively rich and long form. It can be shortened, although not reduced to very short. But the three basic principles should stay. The four phases of the design thinking double diamond should stay. The quality of the facilitators is very important, because it's easy to gather people, but facilitators need to have the capacity to stimulate expression, but also at a certain stage to bring towards conclusion without interfering on the content, but having a clear management of the cycle. Confidentiality and continuity are important if we want really new things to emerge, and not just the contraposition of the well-established point of view to be confronted. And of course, it's important how you choose the participants in order that they are actually relevant to the subject. The rest that you find on the right side is quite negotiable. Now, of course, not all policy labs may organize micro experiments. Sometimes you move directly from the choice of the option to the formulation of the recommendation because of time constraints, resource constraints, but still the recommendation in this case should be as practical as possible, almost an action plan, in order to allow the things to happen afterwards. Next slide. Yeah, okay, this is complicated to explain. So a facilitator is not, normally we said at least two, in order that the different competence in real methodological skills in facilitation of a group were also combined with the capacity to listen to external stakeholders, to organize, to reach out to the policymakers, and to accompany them in analyzing the next steps. It's complex, but you find all of this in the guide that Tamara has recommended. It's important before launching that you identify the categories. She has already mentioned it, and you find the right composition of the policy lab. Now, of course, you can co-opt, but you can also launch some call for participations. Participation is based on interest in the subject. And so some people are there by definition because they are in the policy-making body that is responsible for that. Some others are obvious stakeholders, but some others between the final users and also between the grassroots stakeholders can candidate themselves to take part in a policy lab. It's important that they engage for the 3 workshops. It's important that those who have never taken part in a policy discussion go through a preparation workshop in which they understand the policy area and the policy cycle, most important, and are enabled to talk publicly when they have never done it. And then, of course, it's important that the policy labs are communicated, that there is the right level of expectations about them. Because if there is expectation, the possibility of them being ignored reduces to the minimum. And so it's important that the city knows. In our cities, especially in some of them, the existence of the policy lab was advertised. They were in the main square, and it was announced that some experiments will be made, and people were recruited publicly. So I think it shouldn't be it's a small things in terms of number, but it's not a small things in terms of engagement. And many people participate without being in the core group that discuss concretely the things and are consulted anyhow. Well, of course, I think this we don't have time to go through all of this. The presentation will remain, and most of these things are also contained in the guidelines that are proposed to you. I think the only point that I want to stress at the end of my presentation is that we are strongly inspired by the event in Strasbourg and by the presentations that were done there to propose a wide sharing of the resources, of the know-how, of the lessons learned amongst other people who are interested in making citizens' participation effective. Of course, the big issue in Strasbourg was how to move from the local level to the national and to the European level. We don't have yet an answer on this, but we try to keep the community of the cities together and to spread the information on our project to cities network in order to share. And of course, we support every attempt by the Joint Research Center in ISPRA and in Brussels and other groups like the Interreg Policy Learning Platform to share this experience and to constitute a community of practice that can work at European level and beyond. Thank you for your attention. And now I give the floor to Caroline.
Yes, hello. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of what the Policy Labs brought to Grenoble-Alpes Métropole. So I'm Caroline Schlenker and I work at Grenoble-Alpes Métropole. And we were very lucky to participate in this project because it brought a lot of things to Grenoble-Alpes Métropole. We joined the project a little bit later, so the Policy Lab implementation for us was done in the course of 6 months, not 1 year, in 2023. And our challenge to start was, our challenge had to do with how to improve our reception policies here in Grenoble-Alpes Métropole. So it was quite of a large challenge for which we needed a range of different local stakeholders. One, of course, were the newly arrived migrants, which in French was the primo-arrivants, that we included in our policy labs, the associations, institutions, and also our local elected officials. We were lucky in Grenoble-Alpes Métropole to have just set up a council of refugees that actually participated in the policy labs as well in the newly arrived migrant group, and who were the ones who started off the first session with theater forum activity in order to show what they thought the issue really meant. So we did a total, like Claudio said, there were 3 workshops in the process. The first one for us was in June, where we tried to identify together what the issue was. And we worked for 2 full days, so all of those people together. The newly arrived migrants, we met them before for a little prep session where we tried to explain to them what citizen participation meant for us, what were the competencies of the métropole, what did it mean, what did we do at the métropole, and also we tried to explain a little bit what was going to be the process of the policy labs. And in the course of the 2 days, we identify not only what the issue meant, what the underlying questions were, but also what actions should be taken. After this first session, all of the institutions, associations, elected officials went back to their groups to validate the first ideas that the policy lab had. And we came back in September for a full day in which we selected which actions should be taken here locally and decided on three experimentations that should be led here in order to validate that they were pertinent, that they should be conducted. The 3 experiments that we did in Grenoble was 1, a guide for newly arrived migrants. 2, we tried out a mentorship program to help people access work. And the 3rd experiment was a training of reception desk staff in welcoming migrant inhabitants. So those 3 experiments were conducted by the participants themselves over the course of 3 months, and they were evaluated by the participants. And on the last session, which took place in December, which was again 2 days long, the 3 categories of actors, so there were 30 overall, took the lessons learned from the experimentations, went back to the actions that they had selected that they thought should be pushed forward, and drafted the recommendations for the authorities. So this was all done in December. Following that, because the project actually had the implementation phase in it, I was able to stay on to follow up on the recommendations and to set up a certain amount of groups. So, for example, an internal steering committee to make sure across departments that we could build up a tool to move to actually implement the recommendation, to assess how far we've been in the recommendation. We had an elected officials group that also has as one of its objectives to follow up on the recommendations. And we also had the partners group of all the associations and institutions that were part of the policy labs that followed up on the recommendations over the course of the year. This meant that we were able to finalize the guide of newly arrived migrants, which I can actually share on the feed, within 6 months after the project, which is a very short amount of time, because not only had they had assessed the need and validated the need during the experimentation, but the follow-up phase was also a way of getting everybody involved in the guide. We also were able to start off new activities locally, like the Café de l'Hospitalité, the Coffees of Hospitality, which are new times where people can take part in local activities, also co-piloted by migrant inhabitants themselves. We also were able to set up a work group on interpretation that has led to a new offer on interpreters that can actually be there on site in the area, and we're actually working on this right now, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a great accelerator for action for us, and it was incredibly effective to see how when you bring everybody together to work on the same issue and they actually take part in the follow-up. And as of today, we are still, we just met the partners again. The project is over on the 17th of February to present to them all of everything that has happened. And they are all, even the associations and institutions have their own follow-up tools. And they are now going to meet every year to see how the recommendations have moved in all of their sectors. So I think that's all. I didn't want to be too long. The idea was to give you an idea of what has happened in France. I'm not going to go into details in all the networks as well and the wonderful things that have happened following that. But we wanted to spend a bit of time discussing with you your own practices. And also, if you have any questions about this presentation, to go into your breakout rooms. If you haven't done so already, can you please state your language, EN for English and FR for French, on your name so that you can be put in separate breakout rooms my breakout room will be in French. And the idea in this exchange is to talk about what you have done, see what you think are interesting about the policy lab that we have just presented, but also if you have any more questions about what we have just presented, we're here for that. Thank you.
On devrait tous être retournés en plénière. Alors, je pense qu'il faut resélectionner le canal d'interprétation si vous en avez besoin. Je pense que ça vous a dû vous remettre sur
I believe that
l'audio
you must
original.
have been
Hop.
back
Je vous
to
laisse la
original
parole,
audio.
Tamara,
So
Claudio
Tamara,
ou
Claudio,
Lorraine,
or
pardon, Caroline.
Caroline, over to you.
J'ai oublié vos prénoms.
I'm sorry, I forgot your first names. It's one of those days.
That's okay. Thank you, Gabrielle. I had several interesting questions in my group. One had to do with the participation of the children in a policy lab. As I mentioned also during my presentation, we had in Mechelen we have two 11-year-old girls taking part. It's not without its difficulties, but it was necessary. As I told you, the topic in Mechelen was the sense of belonging with children and young people. So, not including them would be not very participatory. So, but we managed. It's difficult. It can be done. It's worth it, and not only the children found that, but the adults as well. We also had a question about mobilization of refugees and migrants, how to get people to engage in discussions about policies that will maybe not affect them, or will affect them at a later moment. So the key there is to have enough time for preparation, for communication, and to find people who are intrinsically motivated to talk about the topic. We had in Mechelen the luck to have found the parents and people with their own school experiences that were very, very motivated to make school better. Voila. So that's a very short summary of the questions we had in the plenary room. I give word to Claudio.
Well, we were very few in the English speaking session. The main debate was about similar issues as you mentioned, Tamara. So how to select participants and how to keep them motivated to follow the full cycle. And of course, I explained that we had on one side the initial selection was based on their interest for the policy challenge. And the second element was the fact that they saw the city administration well present in the meetings, participating, listening, interacting. And so they had the feeling that it was not just a way to extract some ideas, but something more committing. And then, of course, the small size of the policy lab helped to establish personal relations and the confidence relations between the participants, supported also by the confidentiality rule that we were applying in the policy labs, so not allowing the policymakers to make a public statement of what he or she had told in the policy lab, but just relying on the official report of the policy lab, with all participants agreeing not to say who said what, but just to report on the dynamics of the conversation and on the proposals that were emerging, on which there was more or less consensus during the lab, but without ever mentioning who was in favor and who was against. And this, I think, is a very good rule to keep people motivated to respect and to be engaged in an operation that they feel as relevant, not just an exercise of how to say, of tokenism of participation.
So in our workshop, we talked a little bit about so there was a good question about what were the negative aspects of policy labs because we only talked about the positive ones. And also we explored the question of the fact that it was an experimentation for all of our local authorities. There was a lot of things that we didn't know before we started the project, and the mode in which we interacted with each other between cities. So about the negative aspects, I must say I didn't speak too much about negative aspects because I thought that in our local authorities, we actually were really driven by the experimentation. We loved the experimentation, and it led to actual consequences in all of our local authorities that we all were very happy about because we were not expecting much because it was an experimentation. We didn't know how far it would go. And also there was a question about what kind of deliverables were available on our side. So we were lucky enough to have Agostino in our group who shared some of the deliverables that came through the project because it is also a research project, which is something that we didn't talk about enough, but we have a huge number of deliverables from the project that some were in the project and some, because we loved the project so much, are additional to the project that we made publicly available and that you can have access to. And I think, Agostino, you might be able to share it with the whole group here, the drive, so that everybody can actually have access to these deliverables. I also shared more locally the address to the citizen participation department here, who has access to all of the facilitation tools that we've used in the project. If you're interested in having specific French, the things with the French facilitation tools we used here. I'm putting it in the chat as well. I'll let you, Tamara, finish up the session.
Before wrapping it up, my question for everybody present here, is there anything else you would like to ask, say, share with us? I see people sharing some tips in some links in the chat about participation of children, about other projects, so feel free to do that. If you don't have any questions now, in the presentations that we shared with the organizers, you can also find our email addresses in case you want to reach out to us. You're very welcome to. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And if not, I would like to thank you all for an active participation. It was a pleasure to talk about MasterLab again. Thank you. Thank you also to the organizer for facilitating this session.
There is a question.
Oh yes, maybe this is Claudio for you. Alex took part in my group, but he had questions about further policy lab projects. I think you have a good overview of what's happening on that front in Europe.
Yes. Am I able to speak? Yes. So first of all, there is a big family of policy labs that is taking place within the EU for Youth program in the Eastern Partnership countries. I'm also the coordinator of these projects, and there are, for example, 15 that are starting next month in Armenia, in 15 different towns of Armenia. The structure is the same. It's a shorter format, but essentially it's the same organization that you find in the guidelines that Tamara has mentioned. Then in the European Union, we are actually running a project on adult education called LICEAL, and Agostino can also pass a link to that, in which we are activating in every country participating in the project, so France, Italy, Spain, Austria, and Romania, and Turkey, some policy labs on how to overcome the barrier between the vocational and the non-vocational citizenship element of adult education. And these are quite productive. Then there is a policy lab organized by the Lifelong Learning platform in Europe on lifelong learning in general policies that is related to the intergroup of the European Parliament on lifelong learning, on competencies and skills. And what else? Well, there are other things, but what we are trying to create in these years is a sort of a policy lab hub in which all facilitators and participants in policy lab can gather and exchange experience on what is happening around, and we try to develop a level of expertise and community exchange in the area that will help to put in place this form of participatory democracy that we find quite useful at the local level, but on which we are still very doubtful that it can upscale. And the discussions in the last 2 days in Strasbourg, in fact, were very focused on how to link the different levels. Now, at the moment, we are sure that the policy labs can be very productive at city level, at local level. We are not sure that they can travel to the national and European level. Maybe if you have ideas and you want to communicate with us, we would be very interested to have your suggestions on this point. For the moment, we are trying to keep the local policy labs people together at European level through this platform.
Thank you very much, everyone. Please don't hesitate. I think I saw Tamara put all of our emails down in the chat, so please don't hesitate to contact us. Just for your information, my email will no longer be active after the 31st of March. So, but you can of course relay emails to my colleagues because Claudio and Tamara are going to stay in touch with me. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Bye.
Merci à toutes et à tous. Et puis, je remercie du côté de Décider ensemble, Caroline, Tamara et
Thank you
Claudio pour
all. I'd like to
cet
thank
atelier très intéressant. Et
Tamara,
puis, je
Caroline, and
pense
Claudio
que
for this
à tout le monde,
insightful
s'il y a besoin,
workshop.
pareil, d'un document ou
If
d'autres choses,
you need any
n'hésitez pas à nous
documents, anything
contacter.
else,
On fera
please
le
feel
relais.
free to reach out
On
to us. We'd be
transmettra. Si
happy
vous
to
voulez
share
aussi
those,
transmettre
or
le
if you also
PowerPoint
like to
du
share
côté des
the
intervenants
PowerPoint
participants, c'est également possible.
for the speakers
On
to the
fera également un
participants,
compte
that's
rendu
also
qui sera
possible. We'll
disponible
also
sur
be
le site de
preparing a
Décider
report that will
ensemble.
be
Donc voilà.
available on the
Si vous
website of
avez
Décider
besoin
Ensemble.
d'autres
If you
éléments, il y a
need any
aussi
other
également d'autres
information,
sessions
we will be having future
qui sont
sessions
encore disponibles pour
that will
demain
be
avec des
available for
ateliers traduits,
tomorrow with
des
a
ateliers en
translated,
français aussi sur des sujets
interpreted
passionnants
SAT
comme la
workshop. So
démocratie
for
participative en
passionate
Ukraine, dans
subjects
les
such as
Balkans,
participative
dans les
democracy in
Balkans
Ukraine or in the
et
Balkans,
sur le
as
langage
well
écrit
as
participatif
on
et plein d'autres choses. Voilà. Donc, je vous
participatory
remercie à
language.
toutes et
So
tous de
thank you
d'avoir
all for
participé
having
et
taken part in this
j'espère
session,
pouvoir vous
and I
dire
look
à demain
forward
pour
to seeing you all
une
tomorrow
deuxième
for
journée de
a
sélection
second
d'ateliers en
fruitful
ligne.
day
Merci à tout le monde.
of
Merci,
digital
Gabriel.
workshops. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gabrielle.